This is pre-algebra lesson 6-5. Fractions, decimals, and percents. A percent is a ratio that compares a number to 100. Most of you are very familiar with percents because you use percents all over the time when you talk about your grades. If I said you had an 18 out of 52, most of you would know that's probably not a very good grade, but very few of you would probably know that that's actually only a 35%. So today, after today, you'll know how to figure out how to change fractions to percents, percents to fractions, decimals to fractions and percents, and vice versa. All right, the first thing we're going to learn today is to convert a percent to a fraction. To convert a percent to a fraction, you write each percent as a fraction with a denominator of 100. It doesn't matter how the percent is written, write it as a denominator of 100, and from there, you'll clear it out to get it to be a fraction. Remove your percent sign, and then reduce your fraction to lowest terms. So let's look at a couple of problems here. We're going to convert 30% to a fraction. First thing we're supposed to do is write 30 over 100 because we removed our percent sign, because percent means per 100. Now we simply need to reduce this. 30 and 100 both are divisible by 10, so this reduces down to 3/10. And we are done. 175%. Write each percent as a fraction over 100. So I've written it over 100, gotten rid of my percent sign. Now I'm going to change this. Okay, right away you should see that this is a mixed number. It's 1 75/100. And hopefully you know that 75 over 100 is reducible by 25. So it's 1 3/4. (7.3%). Now this one's kind of interesting because you're going to have a decimal fraction and you really can't have a decimal fraction. So we'll write it as 7.3 over 100. I cannot have a decimal inside of a fraction. There is no such thing as a decimal fraction or a fraction decimal. So I have to clear this decimal point. In order to clear this decimal point, I need to multiply the top of my fraction by 10, and I'll multiply the bottom of my fraction by 10. Because we want to keep our fractions equivalent, and as long as you do the same thing to the top as you do to the bottom, you'll keep your fractions equivalent. 7.3 times 10 is 73. 100 times 10 is 1,000. Now we reduce this fraction if we could, okay, but luckily enough for us, 73 over 1,000 does not reduce anymore. Let's look at 58%. 58% would be 58 over 100. Well, let's just say you didn't know what the greatest common factor out of 58 was, and so you should look at this and be able to say, oh, it's divisible by 2 because both of those are even. If both of your numbers are even, you obviously could divide by 2. If that's not the greatest common factor, you'll just divide by 2 an awful lot of times. But if it is the greatest common factor, you know where to start, and you're also done. So if I divide this by 2, I get 29. Half of 100 is 50, and I am indeed done at this point in time. 144%. Again, so get rid of the percent sign and write 144 over 100. That will change to 1 44 over 100. I know that 44 is divisible by 4 and 100 is divisible by 4. So that's 1. 44 goes into 44 divided by 4 is 11. And 100 divided by 4 is 25. So it's 1 11/25. So converting a percent to a fraction is really not all that complicated. It's a very quick and easy couple of steps. Converting a percent to a decimal, even easier. Converting a percent to a decimal just requires you to move the decimal point 2 places to the left and remove the percent sign. Remember, if a number does not have a decimal expressed, it's always at the very end of the number. So if we look at our first number here, 16%, 16% written as a decimal, we first get rid of the percent sign, so we have 16. The decimal point would be here. If we move it 2 places to the left, boom, it starts there. It's 0.16. Do you have to have the leading 0? No. I tend to write it because it's neater, and it's definitely clear where your decimal point is. Some of you are kind of stingy with your decimal points, so sometimes it's hard to see where your decimal point is. 62.5%. We'll remove the decimal percent sign. 62.5, move the decimal point 2 places to the left, 0.625. It's a very quick and easy step. 120%. I think I'll use a different color this time. 120%, I will remove my percent sign. It's 120. My decimal point would be here. Move 2 places to the left. It's 1.2. Simply done. 45%. Scroll up a little bit more here. 45%. Is 45 with the decimal point would be here. Move it 2 places to the left. 0.45. And number 10 here, 1,095%. Wouldn't that be a great grade? All right, decimal point would be here. Move it 2 places to the left. It ends up to be 10.95. As you can clearly see, converting a percent to a decimal is very, very easy. All it requires, remove the percent sign, move your decimal 2 places to the left. Because remember, percent means per 100, so we're actually dividing by 100. Moving the decimal point to the left is indeed the same as dividing by 100. If we need to convert a decimal to a percent, we just converted a percent to a decimal, so if converting a percent to a decimal meant we had to move the decimal point 2 places to the left, converting a decimal back to a percent means we're going to move the decimal point 2 places to the right. The hardest thing for people to remember is which one goes which way. Percent to decimal, left, decimal to percent, right. Okay, so if we're going to convert each decimal to a percent, 0.412, if I move that decimal point 2 places to the right, it becomes 41.2. And I have to add a percent sign. So 41.2%. 0.4 as a percent is actually 40%, because if you move the decimal point past the end of the number, you have to put a 0 where that digit would be, so that we have something in that place value. 0.023, move the decimal point 2 places to the right, 2.3%. Okay. You can always pause the video, try a few problems on your own, and then unpause the video to see if you got your answers right. It's a great way of practicing. 1.75, if I move that decimal point 2 places to the right, it'll end up over here, so it's 175%. And 21.2, if I move that decimal point 2 places to the right, it's 2,120%. Percents to decimals and decimals to percents is a very quick computation because all it requires is moving a decimal point, either adding or removing a percent sign. Converting a fraction to a percent. This is probably the hardest of all of the different things that you need to do. And it's still not that difficult. It's the most cumbersome, but it's not hard. The easiest way to do it is set the fraction equal to a proportion of x over 100. Then solve your proportion. Some people like to try to go, oh, well, I want to change my fraction to a decimal and then change my decimal to a percent. That can get really, really hairy because you can forget which way you were going, what you were doing, and where the decimal point goes. It's much easier to just learn to change a fraction to a percent, set it up as a proportion equal to x over 100, solve your proportion. So here we have problem number 16, where it says 4/7. So I'm going to set this up, 4 over 7 equals x over 100. Remember, back in 6-1, we solved proportions. Actually, that was 6-2. So if we cross multiply, okay, remember to cross multiply to solve your proportions. This way. So I have 7 times x equals 4 times 100. 4 times 100 is 400. Divide by 7. If I take 400 and I divide it by 7, it's going to come out to be an interesting little decimal number. But do realize it says if the percent is not exact, round to the nearest whole number percent. So what I'd like you to do in your homework to show me that you know that it's not exactly a whole number is tell me that it's, in this case, approximately equal to 57.142, and it keeps going, which would be approximately 57%. Show me what your number is before you round it so that I can see whether or not you're rounding properly. If you get the wrong answer, I need to know, did you do the wrong math, or did you round wrong somewhere, or where in your problem did you do your incorrect math? Let's look at another fraction. 3/11. So 3 over 11 equals x over 100. Cross multiply, I have 11x equals 3 times 100, which is 300. Divide by 11. Okay, X will equal, if I take 300 and I divide it by 11, I'm going to get 27.27, and the 27 repeats. It did say round it to the nearest whole number, so we can clearly see this, after the sevens place we have a 2. A 2 does not make it round up, so that would round to 27%. Last but not least, 5/16. From 18 now. Way to the right. So 5/16. Again, 5 over 16 equals x over 100. 16 times x is 16x. 5 times 100 is 500. Divide by 16. X will equal, if we take 500 and divide it by 16, we're going to get 31.25. Okay. It says if the percent is not exact, that's an exact percent. It's not a repeating decimal, it's a terminating decimal, so we can leave it as 31.25%. Okay, so we're fine because the direction said if it is not an exact percent. 31.25 is an exact percent, so we can leave it as 31.25%. So you learned how to convert. You learned how to convert percents to fractions. You learned how to convert percents to decimals, decimals to percents, and fractions to percents. 4 easy concepts that you will find to be very, very helpful throughout your entire mathematical life.